What's your poison?
We're kind of flipping the script because it's very easy to point the finger at another person.
When I feel like I want to disintegrate from a relationship or when I feel disconnected, it's because I don't feel like there's trust there.
I just couldn't do it because I was so entangled in my past relationship, not dealing with the hurt.
Sometimes there's a healthy breaking in a relationship. Like my family, I can't change them, and yet they're serious. I actually have to create some distance in order to establish a new way of living.
Bottoms up.
Welcome to the Levy Podcast, where we have curious conversations about Christ-centered integration. I'm your host for the show, Leroy Case, and I'm here with my friends, Lindsay, Adam, and Ralph. And today we're going to be asking the question, what's your poison? Two podcasters walk into a bar, and the bartender asks them, what's your poison? They look at each other and in unison say, avoidant attachment. Hey, can we have 2 beers, please?
Yummy.
We all have experienced relational disintegration, where relationships get fractured and things fall apart, and you're left asking the question, what happened? What went wrong? Well, you might want to ask the question, what's your poison?
So this is so much fun, Leroy. And I love the picture that you just painted for us. It reminds me of that Miranda Lambert song. You know, well, I heard Jesus, he drank wine, and on and on. So we'll just qualify that for any of the skeptics. But yeah, the relational integration topic is a pillar for us. It's the horizontal pillar that's in context of the vertical pillar, relational integration with God. So this is our relational integration with others. And you asked, what went wrong? And what comes to mind right away for me is most of the time, we always feel like, well, it was the other person. The other person did this. This person did that. And what I love about our question today is it asks, you know, of course it's punny and funny, but what's your poison? So we're kind of flipping the script because it's very easy to point the finger at another person, but looking at ourselves and where we may be the poison in a relationship is a whole nother ballgame. So bottoms up.
I think we have enough history together here on the call to have experienced each other's poison in some way. I'm sure you've experienced mine.
Yeah. It's really interesting when it comes to relationship and when two people interact with each other and learning about our strength and our weaknesses, and then the conflicts comes in. Conflicts comes in, and at that moment we don't even consider about the person feeling. The only thing we're thinking is about ourselves. It's like almost like it's about me, you know, how I'm feeling, how you hurt me, how you make me feel. To me, the disintegrator on relationship is when we make it about ourselves. You know, we're not taking the time to think about the other person. Whatever conflict is, like a first reaction is about, what did you do to me?
Yeah, Ralph, that's good. I think we do find ourselves in an epidemic of victimhood.
Yeah, there's a lot of self words that go together. Selfishness, self-focus, self-reliance, self-interest, right? You could keep going. There's so many words that include that word self that...
The best one, self-righteousness.
Ralph's throwing strikes today.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, he is. Slam dunk it. Dunk it.
Yeah, it's so interesting with the self piece because when I was thinking about this, the word trust came to mind. I know for myself, a lot of times when I feel like I want to disintegrate from a relationship or when I feel disconnected, it's because I don't feel like there's trust there. And oftentimes when you talk about um, the self piece, I think the trust for me often comes from, I think you're so focused on you that you're not worried about me. And so, in many ways, it almost causes me to go into a place of if you're protecting yourself, because that's really what those things do. Ralph, when you mention self righteousness, Leroy, you mentioned selfishness. Those acts are, in many ways, me defending myself. And so, when I'm so focused on me, I can't expect you to trust me because I'm
Mm-hmm.
not thinking about you. My concern
Yes.
isn't you. My concern isn't something outside of me. It's just making sure that I'm okay. And that's
Yes.
when I've found in my relationships that I start to see chafing, that I start to see a disconnection.
It's funny when I see what's your poison, the first thing came in my mind, it was my failure. And one of my tough failure and God is really working with me on it. It's a divorce. And it's so funny how when you go through a divorce, how all those things that we talk in the other episode, the shame, the fear, the hiding, the blaming, it's all part of it. But this the beauty of it. The beauty of it is that how God can take such a failure and make something beautiful with it. And if I look the way I was when I was married and the way I was, well, the way I am now after this divorce, it's totally a different Ralph. And in that divorce, man, I heard a word from you so unconsiderate. And those words was like a knife. And sometimes I used to say to myself, man, what's she saying? I'm so inconsiderate. But then as God took hold of me and understand the relationship of between a man and a woman, I realized the responsibility that I had as a man, where my job was to love her, to care for her, and to die for her. And I didn't understand all that until I lost everything. But I'm so thankful for Christ for allowing me to go through that and, to go through it to be the man that I am today.
Thanks for sharing, Ralph. Yeah, that's one of the biggest pervasive challenges in adult relationships is divorce. Like the statistics are staggering. I mean, I feel like half the population doesn't even get married anymore because why? They're either moving on or they don't want to engage marriage lawfully or covenantally, whatever someone's version of it is, just for some of those reasons. So thanks for being vulnerable with past Ralph, who still had lessons to learn. And don't we all?
Ralph, when you were talking about the word inconsiderate, just to tie that into what we had been talking about with the self theme, the word inconsiderate uses the root word consider. When you are considering someone else, the focus is off self and it's on
Mhm.
them. But when you're
Mhm.
being inconsiderate, often it's because you have your eyes on yourself. And not that that is some new novel idea, but just to connect those two ideas that we were talking about, because it is so easy, as we all know, to get our eyes on ourselves. And
Mhm.
I can't tell you how many people have talked about their ex being a narcissist. I've heard that word so much in the last handful of years, and I'm not saying that it's not true, but it is interesting how many people in my life have called their ex, either ex-spouse or ex-significant other, a narcissist.
Really?
And That is
Well,
interesting. It's an interesting
mhm.
cultural commentary of where we're at. And go down a whole rabbit trail of how social media feeds that and all sorts
Oh,
of things.
wow. Yes, I agree. Hmm.
I think that whole, I think this whole understanding of narcissism is blowing up in pop culture right now because it's pointing at things in our very, Caucasian heavy patriarchal society that haven't even been allowed to be talked about for a very, very long time because it has, threatened the infrastructure.
Mhm.
So I do think there's kind of this wave of examination
Mhm.
that certain people are championing from a truly healthy and integrated place. And a lot of times they do that through humor and, skits, and it is a whole thing. But those modalities can make it accessible. And is it overused? Yes. But is it also maybe underused? Probably in an actual sense. So that's an interesting little subset.
Well, it's an
of
interesting point, Lindsay, that you're making, that when something is not talked about or identified for so long, that when it does finally get named, it's easy to zone out or to dismiss it once it becomes a thing, because you're like,
Mhm.
oh, this is coming up all the time. It's a buzzword. And not that that can't be true and something can't be overemphasized, but it's almost like when something's been swept under the in the carpet for so long, when it finally emerges, it's like hard to miss the the thing under the carpet that's been there all this time. Just you saying that shifted something for me. It's like, yeah, we might be too quick to say, oh, that's a buzzword, or, oh, that again, because maybe it's just been so dismissed and unconsidered that now it's needing the attention that
Mhm.
it's getting. And some people don't want to be confronted with it. I don't always
Mhm.
want to be confronted with those things. Even the fact that I would have that reaction, right? It could be, not necessarily, but could be an indicator of, hey, why do you not want to talk about this? Why
Mhm.
don't you want to look at this? Again, not that that's always the case, but it could be.
Yeah, for sure.
Mhm.
Adam mentioned trust. So we're talking about relational disintegration.
Mhm.
Trust. Monumental issue.
Mhm.
Possibly the biggest relational disintegrator there is. I think we would be
Mhm.
hard pressed to find something more prevalent
Mhm.
than mistrust for this pillar. But how do you trust anyone? Can you really trust anyone? Does everybody
Very.
lie? Does everybody lie? Because, we only know in part, we only see in part. We're growing
Yes.
and developing. None of us
Mhm.
are fully transfigured with completely glorified truth walking down the road.
Yeah.
So how does this play out how does this play out in families? How does this play out in romantic relationships, friendships, churches, the marketplace?
Mm. That's very good, Lindsay. That's very good. One thing I'm going to say is that Jesus did say that there's no one person is good in this world. There's no one, right? So, we were born with the gene of being of sin, right? It's in us. Now, the thing that we need to think about for us not to be disintegrated, but to be integrated is the illustration of God who's saying, I'm the vine dresser. Jesus is the vine and us the branch. Jesus says, if you abide in me, you will be able to bear the fruit. But if you not abide with me, you can't do it. Without me, you can't do nothing, basically. So it's very crucial that we need to have that relationship with Christ to be able to integrate ourselves with each other. It's that simple. He was very clear. And there's three things that I realized you got to be bind with him. Then you have to be bind in the word. And then you need to buy in his love. So now when you have all those things, then it is easy for you to able to trust, even though sometimes you don't have an understanding about the situation. And you guys can, if I'm totally off, you can tell me I'm totally off. But the biggest struggle for all of us when it comes to trust, and there is mistrust, is how we're going to come back to be able to trust that person. And it's tied up a little bit about forgiveness. Because the heart needs to be healed to be able to retrust that person and say, okay, I feel comfortable and I feel safe in that environment to let that person in again.
It's an interesting thought, Ralph. As you were talking, I love the story about the vine and the branches and being interconnected with the Lord in those ways. It was about He as the vine, we as the branches. And part of being the vine and the branches, and this is one of the hardest parts about relational integration, is that we're actually called to follow in His footsteps. And in doing so, we're actually called to sacrificial love. And so there's a part of stepping into this that's difficult because some of this relational integration actually takes stepping into places that aren't safe, which, especially in our culture, that's a really hard thing to do because we're all about making sure that we're safe. But if we're attached to the vine, there's a part of building trust that's stepping into the hard places with people with an expectation that there may be some challenge, there may be some difficulty, but approaching it with a heart of love and sacrificial love for other people in those relational dynamics.
So you guys are saying that to be able to trust and or to be able to be trusted takes abiding.
And even more so, it actually takes risking being hurt. Like if I want to enter into a place where there is trust, I have to take a chance that there won't be. And that's very uncomfortable. It's very difficult. It's like part of that relational disintegration comes from I'm not willing to step into these places and risk being hurt. I'm not willing to step into these places and risk being misunderstood because the focus is me. Like we were talking about earlier, it's selfishness. It's self-preservation. It's like we've got to be willing to step outside of ourselves to really think about others and step into places where not only is there a possibility, but even in some cases, there's the absolution of being hurt, of people saying things that we don't like to hear. But stepping into that place like Jesus did and saying, love is worth the pain.
Yes.
I hope this doesn't sound confrontational or undermining, but
Go for it.
just want to also say that there are legitimately unsafe situations where it's not about sacrificial love and it's not just self-protection. It's like legitimately self-protection. Again, just a caveat that these comments that we're making are not speaking universally to every set of circumstances, especially when someone is at risk of physical abuse, being exploited, whatever the case is. There is absolutely a time and place for hard boundaries, sometimes legal action, etc., in relationships as believers. As someone full of the love of Christ, even when forgiveness is extended, sometimes those boundaries are still absolutely warranted and important.
Oh, no, I
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that.
I would like to dial in on that idea of the disintegration that happens in relationship and what's at the heart of that, why it occurs. And maybe there's stories that we would want to share about relationships that we had that did end or come apart for a very specific reason. And,
hmm
and maybe that can help us even think about that in a more concrete way.
Well, I'm going to jump on that one. And again, I'm going to go back to my marriage. So when I got married, one of my issues is my past relationship end up colliding with my marriage. What I'm saying by that, I went to a trauma on that relationship and I never deal with it. And through that trauma, I kind of said certain thing in my mind out loud that I'm never gonna do certain thing anymore. When it came to love, when it come to caring, I just decided at that moment, and we're not realizing. I did say it many times. So when God blessed me with this marriage, this wonderful person, at that point, I made it about myself. So the thing that I was called to do, I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it because I was so entangled in my past relationship, not dealing with the hurt, not dealing what really happened and understand what really happened. When I came to this relationship, it just like the kindness, the love, the being considerate, being thoughtful was not there because I didn't want to give it because of my past hurt. I didn't want to give it. And I didn't realize when I realized it at the end, it was too late. It was too late. And bottom line, what I'm trying to say to summon everything in one word, it was really my selfishness, one. And number two is me not open of learning from being hurt. Because love, sometimes you aren't going to be hurt. And if you deal with the situation, you're going to be better for it. But I didn't do that part. So when God blessed me with something good or was good, I didn't know how to really, when somebody gives you a flower and your job and you got that flower is to make sure you give him the water, make sure you put him in the sun so that flower can stay alive. It was the same. I didn't know how to pour that water. I didn't know how to put that sun over that person. I just didn't know how to do it because I was so angry and bitter from that past relationship. And it destroyed everything in my marriage. And I realized it after some good time of therapy and counseling, you know?
Well,
Yes.
that's a great point. Just that, the role of our history in disintegration of relationships, the baggage that we bring to the table, and often the things that we're not aware of, like you said, you didn't realize, you knew it had hurt you, but you didn't know how much that was coloring and influencing your marriage when you were with someone else. And yet very much carrying a whole nother relationship into that marriage and the pain from it and the messages that came through in that prior relationship. So I think that's a really important insight, is the historical piece, because how many families just continue cycles of patterns from generation to generation. And that's why sometimes, even to your point, Lindsay, sometimes there's a healthy breaking in a relationship because it's like, oh my goodness, these cycles of patterns, like my family's not changing. I can't change them. And yet they're serious. And I actually have to create some distance in order to establish a new way of living and being. But it's powerful, especially when those things come in the context of love, romantic love, family.
For me, when I think about relational integration, I know one of the things that I value is the freedom and space to be able to speak and to not necessarily be judged for it, but to wrestle with ideas and things that are on my heart. I know in many of my relationships, some of the disintegrators have been a lack of freedom, a lack of openness to actually wrestle through those things.
Mm.
And I love,
Oh.
Lindsay, what you said, because you're absolutely right. There are situations where loving sacrificially in those ways isn't helpful. But I think when two people come together and both are in that place of self-sacrifice, that's when you don't get a lot of that corruption. And so I'm glad we clarified that, because if you're in an abusive situation, please, for the love of God, get out. But yeah, I think having the freedom in those places to actually connect and to actually bear myself, and for people to see those parts of myself that I might not be proud of. In the last episode, we talked about shame and guilt and all those different pieces. It's like, for me, relational connection comes from places where it's safe to be unsafe in an interesting way. There may be things that I might say that hit wrong or aren't totally right, and having the freedom to actually talk about those things and to actually bare my soul is helpful. And I know the times when I've had disintegrated relationship is when I haven't had the freedom to do that. It's when I start going into a conversation, then all of a sudden that part of me or that fact of me is not received, and I don't even think it necessarily needs to be accepted, but it needs to be allowed to be talked about. The more we're open to listening to one another and to hearing, that's the part where we actually can integrate. Because if I can't hear all the pieces of you, if I can't like hold space for that, then we can't actually figure out how to connect.
Good. There's one thing I want to say is about disintegrator, about relationship. I think about the word comes in my mind right now is self-righteousness. I think that's one of the big one. Disintegrator, is because, man,
Could you define that, Ralph?
well, the self-righteousness.
Yeah. How would you
Yeah.
define self-righteousness?
So self-righteousness for me, and I'm going to have to go back on my past a little bit. Remember that I remember when I give my life to Christ, and I was so excited. I'm learning about Jesus, and now I want to share Jesus to others. But the way I was going about it, it was very self-righteousness, and it was a turn off on my friends. Like they were like, like, I didn't. I'm not gonna say I lost friendship, but I can see the difference when they were around me. They were like very uncomfortable. They felt like I was very judgy, and it took me a while to figure this one out. It took me a lot of time to figure it out that I was self-righteous, that I put myself above them. Like Jesus had a special relationship with me and you guys, you sinning and you do X, Y, and Z. And I got to be honest with you, I had to go back to a lot of my friends and apologize. Really, really like apologize to them. I'm sorry for being so self-righteous. And when I came the way I judge you, that's not, matter of fact, one of them, I even said like, I was a wrong representation of Christ. And if I cause you not to have a relationship with him, I was like, I told him I was very sorry. And sometimes self-righteousness can do that. It can bring a turn off, and it can be a wrong representation of Christ. And if you look at the scripture too, like Jesus pointed out that a lot in the Pharisees.
Ralph, you're giving some personal examples of how the self-righteousness was a disintegrator in your life, and it made me think about my own life and what have been the poison that I've brought into relationships, or the things that have led to a deterioration of relationship. And I would say that there were relationships that I had in middle school, high school, And then I think things began to shift in college that were codependent. And when I think about codependent relationships, they're relationships in a sense where you are finding your identity in the other person. Not that this is a clinical explanation, definition. I'm sharing my experience of how I understand codependent relationships that I had with various people. And there was so much of me that got wrapped up in my attachment connection to them, their approval of me, how close we were. And it was because I was looking to them to feed something in me that felt deficient, that felt lacking, and it was trying to use them to fill me in some way. And it led to disintegration. And it caused people to pull away. Now, it takes two to tango. You don't just arrive at an unhealthy relationship and realize like, oh, it was all your fault. No, I wouldn't say it was all my fault, but I know for myself, I was looking to things from the other person that could not be filled by them. And because I was wrapping my identity up in that relationship and what I extracted from it, that led to a fracturing in those relationships that
Yes.
I would say some healed from, some never came back around. But that was something I brought to the table that wasn't necessarily this overt, I told this lie to a person and that broke trust. It was more insidious than that because it was wrapped up in identity and then the motivations that were driving a sense of self that were not whole and not rooted in the Lord.
Yeah, Leroy, you just said the word that's been on my mind for the past 10 minutes, and that was
Really?
motivations. Yeah, motivations.
Oh, yeah.
So in this discussion from when Adam shared about being able to have a voice in relationships, being able to have an open place to bring the more blemished parts of us, the parts that we're less proud of, it makes me wonder about motivations and this role of motivation in relationships. And this is where this trust question is so tricky. My husband and I were chatting with a very close friend of ours recently, and we were recounting a very sad story of a ministry leader who was very trusted and very seasoned, who is now in federal prison. And I won't fill in the blanks there because that's not important to say. But there are motivations of our heart that can disintegrate us to such a deep level that sometimes the fracture in our identity from relationship to relationship can get really messy and problematic. So kind of going back to this question of how can you even trust anyone, especially if your church leader has this whole hidden piece of their lives that really wise and mature and discerning people did not know about. How do we do it? And I think I'm not just asking that thematically. How do we trust one another or choose trust or exercise trust when there is always one more thing we don't know about another person, no matter how close you are, no matter how long you've been related, no matter how long you've been married, and so on? What is it in our role as Christ-centered individuals looking to be integrated with God and self first? What needs to happen to have a foundation of trust with others?
Well, that's deep. That's deep, Lindsay. That's deep, and that's a very good question. um, when I'm thinking about all this, what you're saying, um, I think number one is that we need Christ. We need to, like I said when I was talking about the vine and the branch, like we need to be abide in His love and abide in Him, abide in His word. And then it comes to the part of forgiveness. Can I forgive and then understand why you're forgiving that person and how you're gonna assess the situation to let him back in. And sometimes those process can take time. There's some situation it can happen in an instant. And some situation might take 10, 15 years, 20 years. It's just because like you said, it's, because there's so many things going through your mind, question, and trying to understand why the person did what he did. It makes it even harder because at the end of the day, when we fail, especially when we're in a place of authority, when God put us in a place of authority, the responsibility is very high. And then when you fall, it's not only you is falling, it's the people that you are responsible with falls with you too, because they put the trust in you. One of the toughest job, I'm going to call it job, one of the toughest job for me is pastors, because the way we look at a pastor is like we put them up there. And when they fall short, it's tough. It's tough in a congregation, and it's very tough.
Yeah, Ralph. And I think that's kind of the question that Lindsay was asking. And I think you were getting at it when you were talking about Christ being at the center. And there's a part of us coming to Christ that forces us to recognize how much we pale in comparison to what the standard of His holiness is. And the reason I say that is because I think, Lindsay, the key to the question that you're asking is two things. First, it's humility. We can't approach the cross of Jesus Christ without humility, without a recognition of who we are in light of who He is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think oftentimes that arrogance or that pride leads us to say that we can do it better than Him, to think that we can cover up some of these egregious sins, especially that you see in a church. And one of the biggest challenges to the church right now, especially in the West, is the way that it's set up is there's not a place for accountability and for pastors to be real. I, as somebody who served as a pastor myself, experienced that. There's things that you go through where you're in such a sequestered place that actually being able to wrestle through some of the things that are going on in your heart, there's not actually space to go there. Some of that comes back to the trust piece, and what it looks like to exercise trust is to actually have a place where you can be vulnerable, where you can be seen. Many of these leaders that we're seeing fall, there's a lack, in many cases, a lack of, first of all, humility before the Lord first and before each other. And there's a lack of an accountability. And I think when we talk about real healthy relationship, it's relationships in which we build trust to the point where we can actually be seen.
Mm. Mm.
What do you think, Lindsay?
I've said this in a previous episode, I think, but relationships are the crucible. They are the testing ground of finding out what we're really made of and truly discovering our motivations. Because in isolation, we may not know what's motivating us. But when faced with the spectrum of relationships in any situation, we are going to find out, what are we going to do? What are we going to say? What do I actually think? What do I actually believe? And that speaks to what you guys are talking about. And I don't know if we're going to get away from solutioning in this episode or not. Like, let it ride. But if we don't know our own motivations, we are at risk of relational disintegration. Any place that we're unhealed is going to give way to relational disintegration.
Mm.
And any place that we have hidden, that we have covered and protected intentionally or unintentionally. And this kind of goes back to some of the things that are the individual disintegrators, the trauma, those fractures, those even Adam, what you said, those places where you did not feel safe enough to speak, or where your voice was literally silenced in a more intense way. Those places are going to cause disintegration because they're unhealed. There's parts of you that have unvoiced fear, rejection, abandonment, fill in the blank. And all of those things that are not attended to, they bear fruit on their own. And so the fruit of the unhealed individual is broken relationships. You have everything from letting a friendship fade out to a marital divorce like Ralph has experienced. And if you grow this fruit up more and more and more from unhealed places, it gets more intense, it gets more brutal, and ultimately, at maturation, the unhealed individual turns tyrannical, turns violent, turns to dehumanizing others because there's so much pain, it just turns to wrath. And pursuit of power as a compensation. So I know I just went micro to macro, but I have a tendency to do that, as I'm discovering. But as we look at this pillar, I can't help but point back to the other pillars that we've covered. And you guys have said it, Adam and Ralph, you've been saying it this whole episode. If we're not open with God first, we can get into trouble. Then secondly, if we're not honest with ourselves, where's the hope for trust? Where's the hope for connection? Where's the hope for letting, Christ in us be that hope of glory for a very desperate, dying, destructive world? So check yourself before you wreck yourself is what I'm saying.
Wow, Lindsay, very good. Well said. When there's another disintegrator that popped up in my mind is the cultural part. The way you can be raised, the culture that you are being a part of, and sometimes those type of situation can get you in a point where you don't have something called be open to other things, open to other people, open to what the other person think, the way they were raised themselves. I think culture can be a big disintegrator in our relationship too. And then I can go back again. Go back again to give you another part of my history, but this time I'm not gonna have to. I
was gonna say, save it for our next episode, right? Because we're pulling from both directions. I pulled from the previous ones. Now you're pulling from the forward one.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna do that. But what I'm trying to say is, culture can affect a lot of it to relationship you have with others.
Absolutely,
yeah, for sure.
And it is a good observation, one, Lindsay, and also you, Ralph. Lindsay going back to some of our past episodes, Ralph going to our future episodes. Tune in, everybody. But these disintegrators aren't siloed. They're actually very much interconnected. And so there's pieces of, if you're disintegrated in one piece, there's a likelihood that it's affecting another piece or another pillar. Just to know that hey, you may be having challenges on the cultural front or on the relational front, but there may be pieces of that if you trace it back to the source, it could actually be relationship with God or relationship to yourself. And so just a recognition that these aren't just siloed or individual pieces. They're actually interwoven in a really interesting way that God actually created us that way.
It's the matrix.
It's the matrix.
It's the matrix.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground on this episode. And there's a lot here. I'm sure you as the audience are listening and thinking of certain relational disintegrators that you're thinking, how could they not cover that? No conversation is complete. There's always room to go deeper,
Mm-hmm.
to go further with it. And so hopefully there was something in our time together today that sparked something in you, helped you to see something maybe different, maybe a little bit more clearly, to consider a question you hadn't considered before. But when I think about the takeaway for today's episode, based upon all that we've covered, it would be that your personal disintegration is more connected to the relational disintegration we've all experienced than we often realize.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, what we bring to the table in terms of our own stuff, our own junk, our own whatever, is the poison that is often leading to the breakdown of relationship. And rarely is it ever one-sided, right? I mentioned the phrase earlier, it takes two to tango. Often that is the case in any relationship. But we can't own for someone else what they alone can own.
Mm-hmm.
We can only look at ourselves. And so that's where the action step for this week comes in. And that is, again, in the light of God's safe and secure love, invite the Holy Spirit to shed light on the poison that you've brought. There might be a relationship that's coming up very specifically for
Mm-hmm.
you during this conversation. And you're like, I still don't feel peace about that. Like, it's been years and I'm still feeling this like angst and churn as I think about what happened. And I think we have to start with, what did I bring to the table? What was the poison that was introduced that I brought from me that impacted things?
Mm-hmm.
Now, there might be someone who hears this and they want to even take the action step a little further because the Lord is working in your heart and you're like, I need to make amends. I need to actually go to the person and say, hey, I've realized I made this contribution to the breakdown of our relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sorry, and I own that, and I ask for your forgiveness.
Mm.
And there might be another conversation where you say, hey, I don't know what I did, but I think I probably did something. And I'm inviting you to share with me what I did that led to the coming apart of our bond of friendship or whatever it was. And would you show me what I haven't been able to see myself? Now that's super vulnerable. And that might just be for one person, but these are action steps that we can take coming out of this conversation as we start with ourselves and the part that we have played and sometimes continue to play, and God's wanting to start a new storyline or to write in a new chapter where things begin to take a turn. There's always hope, my friends. There's always hope for a new beginning. We're never stuck where we've been.
Amen.
I thank you, and we thank you for joining us on this week's episode of the Levy Podcast. And we would invite you and thank you in advance for liking this episode on YouTube. And if you feel so led to support us on Patreon, we would appreciate that as well, so we can keep having these conversations. Well, until our next curious conversation, we hope that you have a wonderful week. Walking with Jesus, always. See ya.